The first sound was a knock, too deliberate to be the wind. 3 dull strikes against stone, muffled like knuckles pressed through a grave. I froze, brush in my hand, the smell of wet paint heavy in the stale air. The wall in front of me seemed to pulse, not with light, not with movement, with breath. This is the City Methodist Church in Gary, Indiana. Empty since before I was born, roof gone, choir stalls broken, windows shattered and open to snow. I was told to paint over the scarred arch in the apse, told to prime and seal like it was any other job, but walls don't breathe, and yet this one exhaled on my face. Then the bell. Clear, perfect, a single note. The city stripped the tower decades ago, but the sound rolled down through the nave as if the bronze still hung. It was flawless, no sway, no echo, a tone that pressed flat into my chest and lingered like a blade balanced on skin. I held my breath. The brush dripped onto the floor, each drop loud as a hammer. Heat traveled under the plaster. The paint tray trembled. I smelled iron, sweet and metallic, the kind that dries on your tongue after biting down too hard. My eyes watered. And then a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't distorted. It was small. A child speaking with the patience of something much older, words shaped carefully through stone. Don't let him speak for me. My throat closed. My hand shook against the handle. The words slid into the room and hung there, weightless and heavy at once. Not pleading, not threatening, just certain. I backed away, step by step, my boots crushing fragments of glass. The air behind me stayed cold, but at the arch, heat bled out through the seam, spreading over my skin like breath through cloth. I wiped at the sweat on my forehead and felt it come away sticky, though I couldn't see any color in the dark. The bell stopped. The silence after was worse. It was not empty. It was waiting, as if the whole ruin had leaned in to listen. I told myself not to answer, not to make a sound. My lips parted anyway. The taste of rust swelled at the back of my tongue. I clenched my teeth until they hurt, and then the whisper again, softer this time, threaded through the cracks in the wall as if the stone itself remembered. Don't let him speak for me. The air pressed down harder, flattening my chest. My knees felt hollow. My own heartbeat thudded against the silence like it didn't belong to me anymore. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I did neither. I stood with my hands still trembling on the brush, knowing the arch was listening and knowing I had already broken something just by hearing it. My name is Cooper Carter. I never wanted to put that down on paper, but it feels wrong to keep hiding it. I'm 46 years old, a house painter by trade. Some men work with wood, some with steel. I work with color. I keep apartments alive. I scrape mildew out of kitchens. I make ruined walls look like they never saw damage. That's all I've ever been, a man with brushes and rollers and a habit of keeping his head down. I didn't ask for the rest. I'm telling this in the order I can bear it. You heard the bell already. That was later. This is how the road to Gary began. It started on a gray morning when Father Samuel Hartley came to my door. He was the kind of priest you don't expect to see outside of a movie. Collar pressed, coat too plain for the leather of his shoes, a calm in his eyes that didn't quite match the streets outside my building. He asked if I had time to talk about a private contract. His voice was smooth, deliberate, not warm, just careful. I told him I was between jobs. He told me the work was in Indiana. City Methodist Church, he said. Gary. I laughed. That place is falling into the ground. You need a demolition crew, not a painter. You'll be asked to refinish the arch, he said, like I hadn't spoken, and the walls that hold it. Why? For tourists? He shook his head. Not for tourists. For us, that was the first time I noticed the way he said us. Not for the city, not for a congregation that no longer existed. For Rome, for the church that never abandoned the site, even if everyone else had. He handed me a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't fancy. No letterhead. Just 5 short lines in black type. Rule 1. Do not pray aloud in the room with the arch. Rule 2. Do not touch the stone of the arch with bare skin. Rule 3. If there's a knock from within, do not reply. Rule 4. If you see light at the seam, leave the room and lock it. Rule 5. At midnight, stop, whether you finished or not. I read them twice, waiting for him to smile, to tell me it was a joke. He didn't. He just said, "This is not optional. If you take the work, you obey." I told him paint doesn't know midnight. He looked at me like he was measuring my patience against something far older. "The instruction," he said, "is from Rome." The number he named was obscene, nearly a year's worth of what I usually earned for 3 or 4 nights of labor. I agreed before I thought about it. Money has a way of making superstition sound like tradition. We drove in his rental sedan. The highway gave way to side streets. Gary rose up like a carcass of steel and brick. We passed hollow factories and boarded windows, and then the church, broken yet still standing, its spire cracked, its stones blackened with soot and rain. Outside, I saw them. A man in a thin jacket pretending to read a paper. A woman pushing an empty stroller. Another man leaning against a lamppost that hadn't worked in years. They looked like locals, but their posture gave them away. Too still, too watchful. I knew the type, security without the uniform. Later I'd learned their names, Ross D'Angelo and Helen Moreau. But then they were only shadows on a street that felt staged. We stepped inside. The air was colder, thick with dust and the rot of wet wood. I smelled old ash, and under it, something like iron. My boots cracked glass underfoot. The nave stretched out, skeletal. And at the far end, in the apse, stood the arch. It was tall, wide, sealed with rough stone and plaster, as if someone had tried to stitch a wound closed with concrete. Father Hartley spoke quietly. "You'll prime the wall. You'll seal the seams. You won't remove what's beneath. You won't disturb the inscriptions. Tape over them if you must. Do your work, and nothing else." I tried to ask what was behind the seal. He cut me short. Something closed. Something that must stay closed. We were not alone for long. An old man lingered near the broken pews, leaning on a cane. His coat smelled of dust and rain. He looked at me with eyes gone yellow at the edges. "The church sings when it's empty," he muttered. His voice was cracked, but his words were deliberate. "Don't be inside when it sings." I wanted to ask who he was, but Hartley shook his head once, sharp, and the old man drifted away as if he had never been. That first evening, I laid out my kit. Rollers, brushes, tape, compound, gloves. The same tools I'd used in apartments and offices 100 times. I told myself this was no different. Paint is paint, walls are walls, rules are rules, but rules are just theater when you don't believe in the stage. Still, I slipped the gloves on before touching the arch. I kept my voice low. I glanced at the paper more times than I meant to. Rule 1. Rule 2. Rule 3. They stared back at me in black type, and I laughed under my breath at my own nerves. It was only paint, only plaster, only work. That's what I told myself, over and over, until the sound of my brush against stone drowned out the silence waiting beneath. But the silence in that church was unlike any I had known. It wasn't empty. It was pressed down, weighted like hundreds of ears bent toward me. Every time the brush slid, I felt the space lean closer. My body sweated in the cold, my gloves damp from nerves, not from labor. When I stopped to breathe, Father Hartley stood in the doorway. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. He said, "Don't hum, don't speak, the walls will remember." Then he left again. I thought of leaving then, packing up before the first coat had dried. But outside was worse. The shadows of Ross and Helen lingered, heads turning in rhythm as if they weren't watching me, but the church itself. Who were they guarding? Me or the thing behind the arch? The next day, Hartley drove me again. Snow drifted over Gary's abandoned streets. We passed hollow schools, glassless windows, warehouses empty except for pigeons. He never spoke unless I asked. When I pressed him, he said only, "The instruction is from Rome." His voice never cracked. Later, Jacobs found me again. The old man sat on a half-collapsed pew, cane across his knees. His eyes watered from the cold. "You think paint covers what lives in stone?" he asked. His tone was mocking, but not cruel. "I think paint covers what people don't want to see," I said. He chuckled. "And what if the stone wants to be seen?" Hartley entered before I could answer. Jacob stood and walked out without a glance back. Hartley never explained him. He never explained anything. By the third evening, I had convinced myself the rules were superstition, written to scare laborers into obedience. Still, when I read them again, Rule 1 through Rule 5, I whispered them aloud, as if memory might fail me at the wrong moment. The words left a taste in my mouth I couldn't place, half ash, half copper. I told myself, it's only work. But even then I knew I was lying. The first 2 nights I worked without interruption. The silence in the nave was heavy but steady, broken only by the scrape of my roller. By the third evening, I stopped noticing the smell of rot. I moved with the rhythm of labor, hands numb from cold and habit. And then the wall shifted. I was smoothing a coat across the seam when the paint vanished. It didn't drip, it didn't smear, it soaked inward, swallowed whole. The brush ran dry in an instant. I pulled back and saw the plaster darken as if it had taken a breath through pores. The roller spun useless. The wall was drinking. I pressed harder, thinking maybe it was the stone beneath, thirsty for moisture. But no plaster behaves like that. The paint bled into the seam like ink into paper until nothing was left. My gloves were still wet, but the arch looked untouched, pale and scarred the way it had before. No color, no coat, as if I had never laid a hand on it. I backed away, muttering under my breath that it was condensation, suction, something explainable. The cold air in the nave could pull moisture quick, I told myself. Science, old stone and pressure, nothing more. And then came the breath. It was faint, shallow, almost lost beneath the wind outside. But I heard it clearly because it matched the rhythm of my own lungs. A rise, a fall, a pause, and again. The wall breathed with me. I leaned closer, stupid with disbelief, and felt the warmth touch my face. Warm, humid, human. The words followed, not clear, not English. A low chant pressed through stone, half swallowed, half prayer. I could not catch the syllables, only the cadence of devotion, as if someone knelt on the other side reciting in endless loops. The sound set my teeth on edge. "Air pockets," I whispered, "the wind moving through cavities." I clung to the explanation like a lifeline. Old churches hum, old churches echo. It was nothing more. I turned, and Ross D'Angelo was there. He must have slipped in while I worked, the kind of man who could move without stirring dust. His coat was too thin for the cold, his eyes sharp and restless. "Don't trust Hartley," he said. No greeting, no hesitation, just that. His voice was rough, urgent. "The gate doesn't lead where he says." I stared at him, heart hammering. "What gate?" "The one you're painting over." He looked at the arch like it might lash out. "He'll tell you it's a seal. He'll tell you it protects. He won't tell you what's on the other side." I laughed, brittle. "It's a wall, man." "I'm a painter. I don't care about your ghost stories." Ross stepped closer, his shadow long in the halogen light. "Keep telling yourself that. But if you hear them knock again, remember this. What knocks isn't asking permission. It's asking you to answer." Before I could press him, he was gone. He moved back into the nave, melted into shadow. I was left alone with the seam, the brush limp in my hand, the faint whisper still crawling through stone. I forced myself back to work. I told myself rules were just theater. Rule 3, if there's a knock, do not reply, was only there to spook me. I rolled another coat across the scar. The wall stayed dry. For a moment it looked normal again. For a moment I almost believed. But then I heard the breath return. This time, not with me, but against me, faster, hungrier, like someone panting inches away through a barrier no thicker than skin, and the brush shook in my hand until the bristles frayed. I put everything down. I told myself I'd take a break, step outside, light a cigarette even though I'd quit years ago. Anything to feel air that wasn't shared with whatever lived behind the wall. But when I looked back, the seam glistened red under my light, wet as a fresh wound. I wiped my eyes, thinking fatigue had tricked me. When I looked again, the red was gone, replaced with dull gray stone. A hallucination. That's what I told myself. Fumes, stress, nerves, nothing more. That's when Hartley appeared. He stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes fixed on the arch. You heard it, didn't you? I froze. Heard what? The breath. His voice was flat. You should not have leaned so close. I wanted to curse at him, ask why he hadn't warned me. But the rules already had. Rule 2, Rule 3. They weren't suggestions. They were traps disguised as warnings, and I'd already stumbled close to breaking them. You don't tell me everything, I snapped. You bring me in here like a laborer, wave your rules around, and expect me not to notice when the walls talk? Hartley's expression didn't change. Talking is not the right word. Then what is? Echo, he said quietly. Echo of something Rome chose to silence. My chest went cold. The wall exhaled again, long and steady as if mocking him, and this time the chant resolved into words, Latin, faint, the kind I recognized from funerals and nothing else. It was prayer, but twisted, each syllable bent out of shape, like a hymn sung underwater. I staggered back. That's not echo. Hartley's jaw tightened. Then you understand why you do not reply. The whisper rose until it brushed the edges of sound, shaping itself into English. Cooper. Just my name, stretched through stone like a thread pulled too far. My knees locked, my throat dried. I hadn't given my name aloud inside the nave. No one had. Hartley crossed himself, eyes lowered. Do not listen. It lies. I wanted to run at him, demand the truth, but Ross's warning cut through. Don't trust Hartley. The gate doesn't lead where he says. My stomach turned. My arms prickled with gooseflesh. I stepped closer to the arch despite myself. My reflection in the halogen light wavered against the stone, as if the wall were glass, not plaster. My breath fogged. The wall's breath fogged back. And then the voice whispered again, softer, almost tender. Do not let him speak for me. I stumbled away, heart clattering. Hartley's lips moved in prayer he'd told me never to say aloud. Ross's words echoed like a threat. And I stood between them, paint dripping from my roller onto the cold stone floor, knowing nothing in this church was ever going to stay silent again. The fourth night broke me. I'd returned with every intention of finishing the job quickly, sealing plaster over plaster until the rules no longer mattered. But when I pulled the tape across the lower edge of the arch, I noticed marks beneath, barely visible where soot had streaked over stone. Letters. Latin. My hands shook as I tore the tape back. The words had been scored into the stone and smeared over with paint generations ago, but they survived in fragments, enough to piece meaning. Porta, fracta, caelorum, the broken gate of heaven, the words cut deeper than the stone itself. I stepped back, heart pounding, the roller trembling in my grip. All my life, I'd been taught heaven was perfect, untouchable. But the inscription said otherwise. Heaven had a gate, and the gate had failed. Behind the wall, the breathing quickened, not faint this time, strong, urgent, alive. And then the voice came again, not chant, not distortion, but speech in a tongue I knew. Cooper, clearer than before, smooth, patient. You hear me now. My mouth went dry. I told myself it was suggestion, that Hartley's warnings had wormed into my brain, but the sound carried weight, resonance that filled the nave like it belonged. It wasn't in my head. It was in the stone. "Who are you?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The pause was long, filled with heat against my skin. Then, not what he says, not what he fears. I was light. I was opened. They sealed me when I would not bow. The words made me stagger. My knees bent as if under pressure. I wanted to cover my ears, but I didn't. I wanted to hear more. Hartley's hand clamped my shoulder. He'd appeared from nowhere, eyes fierce, face drawn. "Do not speak with it," I wrenched away. "It knows my name. That is not your name on its tongue. That is bait. Rome bound this arch to keep the world whole." "You would tear it loose with a single reply," I shook my head. "Then why write it down? Why call it a gate?" Hartley's silence was answer enough. His lips pressed thin. His gaze slid to the inscription I had uncovered, and for the first time since I met him, he looked afraid. The voice seeped through again, softer now, soothing. "He fears because he served the ones who broke me. I am no lie. I am what waits beyond the wound." I pressed my palm to the glove, feeling the stone radiate heat. My skin tingled beneath the barrier. I wanted to tear the glove away and feel it fully. I wanted to know. Hartley saw it. "Rule 2, do not touch bare. Do you understand why now? It would bind you. It would mark you." "Mark me for what?" "For itself," he whispered. "The Vatican sealed this gate because what comes through wears beauty over corruption. Angels that are no angels, light that blinds instead of saves." The words rattled in my head. I thought of Ross warning me not to trust Hartley, not to trust the seal. I thought of the old man Jacobs muttering about the church singing when it was empty. All of them fragments, pieces that didn't fit. The voice rose with sudden intensity. "I am not corruption. I am the way unbroken. They feared me because I would not kneel to their order, but you hear me, you can free me." My hands shook, my throat locked. "Why me?" "Because you touch stone with patience, because you mend instead of destroy, because you have no faith, and only those without chains may open what is chained." Hartley grabbed my arm. "You will not listen to it. Rome buried armies to silence the song behind this wall. Do you think they lied for nothing? This is not heaven. This is ruin," I shouted back, voice echoing through the nave. "Then tell me the truth. Tell me what's really sealed here." He stared at me, jaw clenched before finally breaking. "It was once called the Gate of Adoration, a passage not to heaven, but to its reflection, a mirror world of sanctity, until the mirror cracked. What came through was worship twisted, praise turned inward. The Vatican called it a paradise for the fallen. They sealed it, because to leave it open was to invite the false heaven to bleed into ours." My stomach turned. My heart pounded like it wanted out of my chest. I looked back at the stone. The seam glowed faintly, red under the halogen, pulsing with each whispered word. "False," Hartley spat. "It lies to lure you. It will promise. It will plead. It wants your hand on bare stone." "Free me," the voice breathed, almost a sigh. "Do not let him speak for me." I staggered, my gloves slick with sweat, my mind split between the command of Rome and the plea of something buried alive. My name on its tongue was not cruel. It was tender, gentle as a child's prayer. Hartley pulled me back, shaking. "If you give it one word, it will own your tongue. If you give it one touch, it will own your hand. Rome is not perfect, Cooper, but Rome keeps doors closed." The voice rose against his words, washing over him, over me, with warmth and sorrow and beauty I could taste in my throat. "Rome fears me because I cannot be controlled, but I am not their enemy. I am yours. The sound swelled until my head throbbed. Hartley covered his ears, but I didn't. I needed to hear it, even if it cracked me open, each syllable bent with sweetness, with grief. I am the part of heaven that still loves. They cut me out to make their order clean. Will you let them silence love forever? My chest ached. My hands trembled as if the gloves themselves burned. Hartley shouted, his voice brittle, "Do not believe! What loves without obedience becomes hunger." Somewhere deeper in the nave, a footstep echoed. I turned sharply, catching sight of Jacobs in the shadows. The old man leaned on his cane, head tilted. His lips moved, and though I could not hear, I knew he was mouthing the same phrase the wall had spoken. "Don't let him speak for me." I blinked, and Jacobs was gone. The cane's tap lingered in my ears as if memory itself had weight. Hartley hadn't noticed him, or pretended not to. The voice lowered, intimate. "You are not chosen, Cooper. You are free. And freedom is what opens me. Speak once, and I will show you what lies beyond the wound." I felt my throat tighten with the urge to answer, to surrender one word. But fear pinned me silent. Hartley's hands pressed hard into my shoulders, anchoring me with desperation. "I know Rome hides truths," he said, voice ragged. "I know faith is stained. But I would rather kneel to silence than watch the false heaven swallow this one. You must resist." The wall glowed faint red, brighter than before, as if my indecision had already loosened the seal. I could feel the pressure of two worlds, one desperate priest clinging to rules, and one pleading voice promising salvation. And I could no longer tell which side of the arch was lying. Midnight came, and I did not stop. Rule 5 was clear, but the brush was still in my hand, the seam still glowing faintly. I told myself one more stroke, one more layer, then I would leave. But the moment the minute turned, the church shifted. The floor groaned, the plaster trembled, the halogen light flickered twice and then burned steady red, though its bulb had no filter. The seam split hairline cracks, bleeding light so sharp it stung my eyes. My hand froze. My body did not move fast enough. The bell struck. Not the broken memory of a bell, but a tone so flawless it split marrow. It rang through my bones, held endless, no swing, no metal, just perfection pouring down from nowhere. The nave quaked, rafters rattled, glass shattered in bursts. I covered my head, but the sound pierced through, clean and cruel. Dust lifted, not falling but rising, spiraling upward into shapes. Wings, vast wings made of ash feathered with soot, unfolding over the arch. They stretched until they filled the air, blotting out the broken roof. The wings beat once, and the cold vanished, replaced with blistering heat that seared my gloves. I stumbled back, skin prickling, sweat stinging my eyes. And then came the cries. Children, dozens, hundreds, crying in unison, each voice layered into a single perfect chord. Too perfect, a harmony without human flaw. It built and built until my teeth vibrated, until the arches above split hairline cracks. My knees buckled under the weight of it. Through the seam, the shape moved. A figure pressed against the stone as if light itself sought form. A body half radiant, half blackened, flames crawling like veins. One arm gleamed white, feathers trailing fire. The other arm hung charred, fingers fused together like obsidian claws. Its face glimmered, features too beautiful to hold, broken by streaks of ruin that melted and reformed each second. A fallen angel, half adored, half condemned. I gagged on the air, hot and bitter. My lungs filled with the stink of sulfur and roses. My hand slipped on the brush until it clattered to the floor. I staggered back, knocking over the tray, paint spilling like blood across stone. Hartley's voice rose in prayer, cracked and desperate. Latin syllables burst from his throat, but each word broke under the angel's cry. He shouted louder, sweat pouring down his temples, voice raw. Domine, protege nos, Domine. The angel's cry drowned him. The children's harmony sharpened, every note slicing, until language itself dissolved in the noise. Ross appeared in the nave, gun drawn, shouting something I could not hear. His voice was a ripple against the flood. Helen, too, her eyes wide, her lips moving, but the bell consumed everything. The seam split further. Light poured like water, blinding, red and white mingling until the walls themselves seemed alive. My own scream tore from my throat but vanished into the cord. My lips shaped words, but they didn't belong to me. They belonged to the sound. Glass exploded inward, shards spun like wings of their own. The pews cracked, splinters dancing in the burning air. Ash rained down and clung to my skin, not cold, but searing. My vision warped, edges bending, straight lines curling. The whole church bent like heat haze. The angel stepped forward, 1 foot through the seam, though the stones had not parted. Space warped to let it pass. Flames dripped from its wingtips, falling as sparks that hissed into the floorboards. I dropped to my knees, not in reverence but collapse. My stomach lurched, my eyes watered blood. I couldn't breathe. Every inch of me shook under the weight of its presence. Hartley screamed my name, but his voice fractured, broken syllables lost in the roar. His hands clawed the air, reaching for me, for the arch, for anything to hold the world still. His prayer broke into sobs, his words collapsing into raw noise. I saw the angel's face fully then, one eye white fire, the other a pit of black glass. Its mouth opened but no lips moved. The children's voices poured from within, layered, endless, calling without words. The sound pressed into me, demanded entry. My ears bled, my chest caved. Ross fired. The gunshot cracked like thunder, but the bullet dissolved in the glow before it touched flesh. Helen cried out, dropping her weapon, clutching her head as if the voices burrowed inside. She fell to her knees, rocking, sobbing like a child among children. The pews toppled one after another, dominoes collapsing. The crucifix that still hung at the far end fell, snapping in half. Fire caught where no flame had touched. The walls wept moisture, then blood dripping down stone in slow streams. The angel spread its ruined wings wider, a storm of ash filling the nave. My eyes burned, my throat filled with dust. Shapes swam in the cloud, faces, hands, entire choirs that flickered and vanished. I clawed at the air, gasping, searching for breath that wasn't poison. Hartley staggered to his knees beside me, clutching his crucifix with white knuckles. "Don't look at it!" he screamed, voice ragged. "Don't!" His words broke as his body convulsed. The crucifix bent in his hands like soft metal, warped by the heat. The cries of children peaked into laughter, the perfect chord twisting, cruel and jubilant. It echoed through my skull until thought itself cracked. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound grew inside, not outside. Every memory, every prayer I'd half forgotten echoed in the same flawless tone, mocking me. I crawled, dragging myself across broken glass and paint and ash. My gloves were torn, skin raw. My body begged me to stop, but the light pulled me, burned me forward. It wanted me on my knees, wanted my hand on the stone. And still, at the core of the roar, that soft voice, the one I'd heard before. Not a scream, not a cry, a whisper in the storm. "Free me," I sobbed, choking on dust, caught between prayer I didn't believe and promise I didn't trust. Ross lay flat against the floor, unmoving, his gun beside him. Helen wailed like she had lost her own name. Hartley shook, lips split with blood, crucifix twisted beyond shape. The arch burned brighter, and the angel pressed closer. I thought it would step through and end the world in fire and silence. I thought we were already gone. And then the bell rang once more. One perfect note, and everything froze. The ash halted in midair. The wings held still. The cries stopped on a single breath. The silence after felt worse than death. It was waiting, listening, as though the church itself wanted to hear my answer. I should have stopped at midnight. I didn't. I don't know how long the silence lasted after the bell. Seconds, hours. It blurred into one. When I opened my eyes, the wings were gone. The light had retreated back into the seam. The nave was dust and glass and ruin, but still standing. My ears rang with a tone that was not there, as if the bell had lodged inside me. I tried to stand and nearly collapsed. My palms were raw where the gloves had burned away. The smell of sulfur clung to my clothes, mixed with something sweet, like flowers left too long in a coffin. My throat ached from screams I hadn't heard leave me. Ross was gone. His gun lay twisted on the floor, melted at the barrel, but no body. Helen crouched near the arch, rocking, her hair veiling her face. I called her name, but she didn't look up. When she did finally raise her head, her eyes were wrong, too wide, too steady, as if something else looked through them. She smiled at me like a stranger wearing her skin. Hartley lay against a broken pew. His hands clutched a crucifix bent out of shape. He stared at the ceiling, lips moving without sound. When I reached for him, he turned his face away. No blessing, no explanation, only silence, as though Rome itself had abandoned him. I wanted to leave then, wanted to run through the broken doors, out into the cold air, back to streets where voices were human. But my legs carried me the other way, back toward the arch. The seam still glowed faint, pulsing like a heartbeat. I swear I felt it sink with mine. And in the quiet, beneath the ruin, I heard again the first sounds from that night, the knock. 3 slow taps, deliberate, patient. Then the child's whisper. Don't let him speak for me. I pressed my palms to my ears. The sound was inside, not outside. It was part of me now. Later they told me the church stood empty. No Ross, no Helen, no Hartley. Only me, unconscious among the wreckage. But I know that isn't true. I know what I saw. I know Helen's eyes were not her own, and Ross's voice still lingers like smoke in my head. I know Hartley turned away because he had nothing left to give. They are gone, but not gone. I have not returned to Gary. I cannot. Yet even here, miles away, in my narrow apartment, I feel the seam. I wake at night to the taste of iron and the heat of breath against my skin. I hear the bell, flawless, endless, vibrating in my bones. I hear the whisper at the edge of every silence. Sometimes it says my name. Sometimes it only repeats the same warning. Don't let him speak for me. I thought I could drink the memory away. Thought I could bury it under paint and plaster and noise. But the silence follows. I tried to work again. Small jobs, apartments, offices, but every wall reminded me of the arch. Every seam looked ready to bleed light. Every shadow threatened to breathe. Clients asked why I flinched at empty rooms. I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell anyone. Nights are worse. I wake drenched in sweat, certain the bell has struck again. The clock shows 3 a.m., and still my chest vibrates with sound. I see wings in the dust when headlights cross my ceiling. I hear children laughing in the pipes. I smell sulfur in the paint thinner. My life is no longer mine. It belongs to the memory of Gary. And still, beneath all the fear, something deeper coils, a certainty. I was not spared. I was claimed. Rome may deny it. Hartley may refuse to speak, but I know. The seam marked me. The voice chose me. I was a worker, but now I'm a watchman, a guardian for something no one should ever guard. I have no scripture for this role, no right, no title, only the weight of knowing that if the arch stirs again, it will call to me first. I will hear the knock before anyone else. I will feel the breath, and I will have to decide, close it or answer. That thought rots me. because I no longer trust myself to choose silence. I no longer trust myself at all. That is the weight I carry. That is why I cannot pray, why I cannot sleep, why I cannot forget. The arch listens, the wall breathes, and I am bound to it now. Chosen or cursed, it makes no difference. The church sings when it is empty, and I am the one left to hear the song. And so I wait. Not because I want to, but because I know there is no one else. The Vatican will not return. Hartley will never look me in the eye again. Ross and Helen are gone to places I cannot follow. I remain. The arch chose, and I was foolish enough to listen. Sometimes, when the city outside falls quiet, I sit in the dark and lay my hand flat against the wall of my apartment. I tell myself it is only plaster, only brick, but then I feel it, a tremor, faint and steady like breath beneath stone. Then the knock. 3 slow strikes, the same rhythm that greeted me in Gary. And afterward, so soft I almost believe its memory, the flawless bell. Not loud, not distant. Inside, waiting. I don't pray anymore. I don't believe. But when the sound comes, I close my eyes, because I know I am already kneeling in ways I never meant to. And if the day arrives when the seam splits again, I will be there. Not as Cooper Carter, not as a painter, but as the guard of a gate no one was meant to see. I should end here, but endings are lies. Nothing ended in Gary, nothing ever will. The ruin still stands, the seam still breathes, and I'm still listening. People ask why I look away when church bells ring. They don't understand. Those bells are broken, human, imperfect. The one I heard was flawless, too flawless. Once you've heard perfection, you can never mistake it again. It cuts everything else to silence, and I know one night it will sound again, not from steeples, from stone. I won't kneel anymore. I won't unburden this to any priest. I whisper warnings no one believes. They call it trauma, hallucination. They are wrong. The seam marked me, and I carry that mark in every silence. Sometimes I wake with my lips moving, shaping words I never chose. Sometimes I hear knocks on my door at 3 a.m, deliberate, patient, waiting. I never answer, not anymore. But I feel the urge, stronger each time, as if my body remembers something my mind resists. My hands twitch like they want the stone again. My throat aches for words not mine. I tell myself it is madness, but madness has no rhythm, no pattern. This does. It waits, it listens, it learns. And the sounds, the same ones that began it all, never leave me. The knock. 3 strikes against stone, slow and certain. The bell, flawless, endless, ringing in marrow. The child's whisper, steady as truth. Don't let him speak for me. They return when I least expect it, in quiet streets, in empty rooms, even in crowds when laughter falls away for a breath, I hear them again. They are not memories. They are rehearsals. So I leave this for whoever finds it, not a testimony, not a plea, a warning. I am not the first to hear. I will not be the last. Rome sealed the gate once, but seals weaken. Breath wears stone down. Sound erodes silence. And when the arch sings again, someone will answer. Maybe me, maybe you. If you hear the bell from Gary, it isn't the wind. Don't answer it. The wall is listening still.